Welcome. We're here again for another Prodependence. I do have to announce too, because the new clinical book for Prodependence has been, thank you. Yeah, yeah.
I'll show it in a minute.
Yes,
Show it today.
yes, please, because we're so excited. I've actually been posting, that was one of my things today. I've been posting to different groups because the more clinicians that understand this message, the better. I think it will really be transformative. So Debbie works with Dr. Kim Buck, and I work with Dr. Rob, and so the two of them are the authors of that particular book. And so that has just been released, and we're working on getting the word out. So if you're working with a therapist that still is using codependent language, you may want to suggest that they pick up a copy of that book. So I'm going to mute and turn it over to Debbie.
Well, welcome. Happy to have everybody here. And I encourage you, as I talk today about how to get unstuck and out of the trauma loop, because I'm going to talk about a phase of recovery that I am seeing kind of present itself, not only in my groups, but in my office, of you've just kind of gotten through that crisis stage, and we've got a little more stability going, some stabilization, maybe even disclosure's been done, and yet you find yourself getting stuck in your recovery. And I think this would be very, very helpful. So you can maybe identify if you're unstuck and what to do about it. How do you go about making some shifts and some changes? So like I said, I've recently noticed, I've had a couple of clients in group, and I've had actually a couple this last week present in my office with, even though they're past disclosure, they're still having some pretty significant trauma responses. And so we have had to spend some time working on stabilization, right? And regrounding them and creating that foundation, but trying to figure out where are the sticking points. So I'm going to talk a little bit about research and how people handle trauma and handle a crisis. And then as it becomes long-term, we can get more stuck in it. And then we're going to talk about, I'm going to give you some examples of how I see it. So maybe you can identify to some of those examples. And then, like I said, we'll talk about the window of tolerance and how our brain is actually a part of this process, as well as some specific steps on how to get unstuck. And some of these ideas might be ideas that you even take to your own therapist if you can recognize yourself in this. And I am going to share with you Dr. Rob's and Dr. Kim's book. I love their Practicing Prodependence book. In fact, Kim and I were in a meeting today, and we just talked about, I was telling her how wonderful it is. I refer to it when I prepare for this webinar. I am referring to it now when I work on my treatment plans for my clients. And she made the recommendation, and I wholeheartedly support it, that if you need your therapist to understand more about this prodependence approach, you might want to take the book in and give it to them, or even read it for yourself. She said, even though it's written for clinicians, there's lots of really wonderful activities at the back of the book that support the concepts within the book. And those activities or those exercises are the ones that I actually take my clients through when they come to group. So many of the things I talk about, if you go to the book, you're going to actually see those activities. So let me give you some examples of how I am seeing being stuck show up in my office. Again, I mentioned this a little bit. It might be, I have a client who comes in, she's had disclosure, it's 2 months post-disclosure, and she comes in and says, there's situations when I'm talking to my husband now that I literally shut down, and then I almost like I leave my body, or it might be she's swinging the other way, or I go into a full-blown panic attack. And she has, done it in private, so a lot of people haven't seen it, but it's becoming repeated now. And she's well past that crisis point, like I talked about. We've had her very stabilized, but as a result of disclosure and some different things, it's kind of kept her stuck, and she's looping in her trauma. Another one is some of the betrayed partners come in and they think, I keep trying to change how I think about my partner. I'm not trying to look at my partner as the addict and what they're doing, but my mind keeps taking me back. I've got stories in my mind, stories I'm telling myself. I've got pictures that I'm making up that my brain just keeps going back to, and I can't get out of them. Somebody else will say, I'm this far into all my work, my recovery work in group with my therapist, and all of a sudden I find myself getting triggered and I go back into the craziest behavior. And I thought I was beyond that. Why do I keep doing this? It's almost like I'm back in that moment that I found out about my partner's addiction. Another one is that partners will come in and say, I see my partner, my addict partner, doing all of their recovery work. And in my mind, I know that they're doing the recovery work, but my body is still telling me they're not safe and I can't move close to them. What's wrong with me? Is this normal? And so we've got to talk about that, because sometimes they get stuck in that and stuck in this, I'm not progressing, I'm not doing my work like I need to, this is never going to get better. And we can get stuck in that. Another one is my partner isn't doing the recovery work. And I don't think that I can progress in my recovery work until he is doing his. And so for them, it's almost like I feel like I'm stuck in hopelessness and I don't know how to move forward. So and then others will come in and say, hey, I'm just stuck in a pit. I feel like I just can't even, I don't know how I'm ever going to get out of it. I'm so overwhelmed. Am I ever going to feel normal? And for whatever reason, they don't have the ability to find any hope in their situation, which is an essential step in the healing process of prodependence. So as I was doing some research on this recently, I came across Dr. Kevin Skinner's book. It's called Treating Trauma from Sexual Behavior, Betrayal. And I just loved a part where he talked about a little bit of research that was done on people and how they deal with crisis, because I think it shows up in betrayal trauma. And he actually referred to Dr. John Leach, who is an expert on survival psychology. And here's what he found. He found that as they tested people, researched these people and their behaviors, when they were in crisis, he found that there was what they called a 10-80-10 split. So 10% of all the people they researched and they analyzed handled a crisis very well. They were able to stay grounded. They could tap into their logic, their reasoning. They could come up with what to do next. But as you can tell, 10% is a pretty small amount of individuals when they're dealing with crisis. So they're very calm, they're clear, they're rational. Now, of that 80%, which makes up the second group, which is a pretty big group, those people go into freeze. So when I'm in freeze, I get stuck. I'm stuck in lethargy, numbness. I can feel tremendous pressure. I might even feel sick physically. I might experience that racing heart. I might have tunnel vision, and I can't think. I can't even remember like my PIN, right? When I go to check out at the grocery store, I am, something comes along, like my child has a homework assignment that's due, and I'm literally shut down. I just want to stare at the wall. So we can be stuck like that. Eventually, though, what happens is that we recover from that eventually, hopefully, and we can become more grounded. Sometimes, though, what happens in that 80% is I shut down and I freeze, and then all of a sudden survival instinct kicks in and I go the other way. I go into hyperarousal. So I'm more combative. I go into more of the fight and the flight. So that's the 80%. Then there's 10% that create more problems during a crisis. They just make the situation even worse because they're highly charged, right? They are trying to almost, to me, it's almost they're in, this panicked fighting mode. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how I see it show up. So when I'm dealing sometimes with a sex addict and they're in partnership with somebody who has an addiction of their own, what I'm finding is that neither one of them are working fully on their recovery. So a crisis comes along, they don't have the skills and tools necessarily, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and escalates. Now, it can happen to even those of us as a betrayed partner who we don't have an addiction, but we may have some underlying things that we have to take into consideration. It might be that separate and outside of the betrayal trauma, we might have other traumas that contribute, and our whole lives we have lived in this heightened sense of crisis, right? We've always had to fight for survival in our life. So when we have another crisis comes along, we can't get out of it. So no matter what we do, it just makes it better. How that shows up, of course, is, I might be trying to have this relationship in the same home with my betraying partner. And every time, we deal with something and it gets tough, we can then, even as a betrayed partner or a betraying partner, it can lead to violence, which is never good. I've also seen some of the betraying partners go out and have a retaliation affair because they want their partners to feel the same level and depth of pain. So what was once bad has now gotten really a whole lot worse. So kind of check and see where you're at, because like I'm telling you, I'm going to give you hope today that there's a way out of this. So in Dr. Skinner's research, he's done, independently, he has found that there are many individuals who have experienced betrayal that have been stuck for 2 up to even 5 years in this space where they not feel like they're moving forward. And of course, we know that's associated with that deep emotional pain that they've experienced, sometimes repeatedly, right, from the sexual betrayal. It's really hard, right, when we're stuck, because we don't have the ability to think and to live in and experience the things in the moment, because our brain keeps wanting us to go back into the past. And like I've said repeatedly here, or project out into the future. And all we have control over is the here and now. So the first place we have to look when we're stuck is we've got to look at the brain. And I've talked about this in my past webinars, because when we are stuck and our brain, all of a sudden, and we're in this stuck place, I've got this narrow window of tolerance. What I could handle before, I can't handle the same. Even simple things in life, my capacity, I love that word, my capacity, my ability to handle it is differently. So how it shows up for the betrayed partner, when all of a sudden our window of tolerance is narrow, is I start questioning things. Is this as good as my marriage ever going to be? And now I'm ruminating and thinking about all the ways my marriage is never going to improve and all the things that are bad about it. It might be, gosh, is this my life forevermore? I don't feel happy. I don't feel whole. Is this as good as it's going to get? Like I said earlier, sometimes, is there something wrong with our recovery process? Am I not doing it right? Is he not doing it right? I told we'd have a really great marriage after disclosure, that once this was done, we could have trust. And then all of a sudden recovery would be much, much easier. And then it's not. For some women who are betrayed and men who are betrayed, they might be in this place of ambivalence where they're feeling like, oh, why can't I move on? Why can't I end this relationship? I love them, but I hate them, and I just don't know how I can do it. Is my husband or partner even capable of closeness and vulnerability? Will they ever get there? Will they ever get to empathy? Is it even reasonable to hope for happiness in my marriage? So this is a repetitive, constant place we go back to, right? It becomes almost the go-to in our brain. So the minute we feel stress, we're outside our window of tolerance, and that's where our brain wants to take us to. So we've got to be aware that trauma affects a person's capacity to tolerate even just simple stressors in life. And understanding your window of tolerance is a key factor in your healing. And so that's why we constantly go back to the fact that in order to increase that window of tolerance, you've got to focus on those foundational things of mindfulness, learning to live in the moment, doing the practices that get you back in your body, help you feel like you're in your body, get you out of the past and out of the future and into the here and now. You also have to have a really great support network and a support system. And we'll talk about that in a moment, and how key it is in taking action and moving out of the stuck. The other thing is self-care is so important. And oftentimes, you know you're stuck when your self-care begins to decrease, when you're not doing it. When I see clients come in and they're stuck, I typically ask about self-care. I ask about support. I ask about all their mindfulness, because it is so important to get your window of tolerance to increase. So some of the things you might need to do in order to get that window of tolerance to increase is you might need to just give yourself permission to not put pressure on yourself about the speed of your recovery, how well you're doing your recovery. If you make a mistake, go into the self-compassion, learn from it, readjust, but don't sit down on the journey and just give up. Keep moving. Another thing is you're going to have to give yourself permission to scale back on your life. So what you used to be able to do, you're not going to be able to do. Just recognize that it's not always going to be like that if you are intentionally doing your recovery work. Because the goal now is to stabilize, to get you where you're feeling like you can eventually add more in, but we've got to get you back in your window of tolerance and then work on building it and making it bigger. Another thing is give yourself the time and the ability to move slower in life in general. I talk to my clients about alter your expectations. I'm not saying to let go of them. I'm saying to evaluate them and see, okay, is this really necessary? Can I do part of it? Why do I want to do it? Right? Can I postpone it? Are there other ways I can get this, whatever the expectation is met? Can I reframe it? Look at it differently. I have found that oftentimes when I was going through my betrayal recovery, the expectations of wanting to get to a better place and feel better and for me to be better, I was expecting it to happen really fast. And we know that the brain takes 3 to 5 years to rewire. Whether it is for the addict who's working recovery, I also believe that is true for the betrayed partner, because there's been that trauma. There's been the crisis, then the trauma, and sometimes repeatedly. So how we see being stuck show up in the betrayed partner specifically, I'm going to categorize this so you understand, and then just kind of check in and see, okay, is this happening with me? And we'll go into details on these areas. One of them is the brain shuts down. And so there's this cognitive paralysis. I'm not thinking normally. I don't have the ability to tap into and connect to the front part of my brain. So I don't have good reasoning and good logic. I call it's kind of a disconnect in a way between I know what to do here, but my body reacts differently. And so in a way, I'm almost paralyzed between, I'm trying to do it right and I'm not. I'm trying to do it right and I'm blowing it. So because I'm not really, my window tolerance isn't wide enough and I'm kind of stuck in this constant battle. Another one is that I get stuck in old patterns. So I'm going and I'm trying my new skills and tools. And then all of a sudden, because it's not going well, I go back into my old patterns. I might get stuck in unhealthy patterns. Think of safety seeking, right? There's some safety seeking behaviors that we've been talking about this in my group. Some of them, hey, I think they're great. I think they help us feel safe and secure and actually promote connection. Others, though, have the opposite effect, and they can take you back into your trauma, back you into a crisis again, repeatedly, if it's not a healthy safety seeking behavior. And at times it can even lead, and I referenced this earlier, even into at times where there can be some violence and some rage. And so we've got to look at that and say, okay, if that's there, we've got to step out of it. Another thing is it can lead us to, like I've talked about, moving into hyperactivity, right? I'm all revved up. I'm going all the time. I call these are my clients that they're kind of trying to outrun the trauma. And so, but in reality, they're kind of stuck. They think they're outrunning it, but they're constantly, keeping themselves so busy that they're not addressing what needs to be healed. And then the shutdown. There are those that just kind of shut down and it's like, you know what, nothing I'm doing works. So I'm just going to give up. And it's hard, right? Because after we've done everything we can possibly think of, you know, being outside the window of tolerance, we're going to go into freeze and just shut down. So let's talk about some of the areas we get stuck specifically. I see clients that get stuck in fear. And when they're stuck in fear, it's because they are stuck in a fight flight response. Sometimes we are triggered back into the fear by a memory where there was danger, and it's really difficult. Once I'm outside my window of tolerance, I'm triggered into fear. I've paired that with a traumatic memory that I can't recognize I'm safe in the here and now. And so that's why we've got to understand that fear is a hardwired emotion in our brain. It's a protective emotion. The problem is we can get stuck in kind of a feedback loop over and over again. It can get stuck, especially when we are living in a situation, when we're in a relationship where it's kind of being, as I move closer to my partner, you know, there's fear associated to that. There's a memory connected to that, or multiple memories connected to that. And so that's why those three foundational things I talked about earlier are so important. When we have trauma, it gets stored in the brain differently. As I've talked about in the past, we experience trauma when we're in that limbic part of our brain. Our amygdalas are firing. We are so overwhelmed, our brain doesn't have the capacity in that moment to process it normally and file it away. So we talk about like fragments of the trauma kind of get stuck in the brain, and the brain doesn't know it's safe, because when I have that trauma and I've got that fragmented, you know, memory in my brain doesn't recognize I'm safe in the here and now. So how that showed up recently is a client who had a really bad dream in relationship to her betrayal trauma. And when she woke up, it was like it had really happened. That whole day, it was like what she had dreamt about was reality. And we talked about, she had a really hard time even separating that it was only a dream, that it didn't really happen. So that's, I think, a really great example of that. Another example would be that I have a memory come up, there is fear paired with it, and I can't get out of that loop. And one of my clients years ago came in and said, the best way to describe it is when she's in that space is, I am like an angry cat that's being cornered, that you're trying to get out of the room. And if you've ever been around an angry cat, they hiss and they'll jump at you and they'll claw at you. And she goes, and that's what I become when I'm in my fear. And so we're going to talk in a minute about how we get out of that. Another one I see is betrayed partners can get stuck in paralysis. Now, this happens short term. We talked about this in the grief, right? Sometimes I'm in shock and denial and I shut down. This is different. With a betrayed partner, we should be able to get you out of that and get you to start moving. We're working through crisis. But what can happen at some point is you kind of get stuck in paralysis again. So you've been making progress and all of a sudden you just seem to not be getting anywhere. You're kind of spinning your wheels. Now, I think this happens a lot when you're in a relationship with a betraying partner who's having repeated slips. That's really, really hard. And you can't do it alone. There's no way you're going to get unstuck without help. This is going to require some really intentional action taking that we're going to talk about in a moment. Another thing is when I'm here, remember I talked about how our thoughts kind of shut down, or we can't really think very clearly. We can get stuck there too. And so that paralysis is, I can't even make a decision about what to cook for dinner. It can be that simple. It can be, I don't know what I'm going to do with this marriage. Am I going to stay? Am I going to go? You know, people are telling me I need to leave. Should I leave? You know, and I feel like, no, I need to stay. And they're kind of stuck. And I try to remind when my clients, when they get to this place, that doesn't matter regarding the relationship. You know, right now, let's just focus on you. Let's help you get better. Let's help you heal so that you can get unstuck. And then down the road, you know, you'll have the capacity, right? The brain will be able to help you with that. If you're experiencing a lot of overwhelm, that you go, oh my gosh, and overwhelm looks different for everybody. Recognize what your overwhelm looks like. For some people, it might look like I just want to sleep all day. For other people, overwhelm might be I go around the house and I'm sighing all the time. I see that a lot, right? I might even be on overwhelm and I'm going out to people and I'm just talking about all the things that I'm having to deal with, right? And I'm just kind of stuck in it though. I'm not doing anything about it, but I'm just kind of stuck in it. Recognize that if these types of behaviors go on for weeks, months, or years, you're stuck. You're kind of stuck in paralysis. So get the help you need to get out of it. I had one client when she's kind of gone through a couple of stages in her healing. And she talks about in her first stage of healing, she had an extended amount of time where all she wanted to do was lay in bed. And she made sure kids were safe and they were, fed and all of that. But she could not fully show up for her children because she was in such a state of paralysis. I can look back on my own betrayal trauma and I can recognize when I was in states of paralysis because I don't have a lot of recollection or memory around those times. So remember, my brain's offline. My brain is not working out of the prefrontal cortex, that front part, right? I'm experiencing a lot of my life back in that limbic part of my brain. So again, it goes back to the basics. We talked about being stuck in old patterns. It's hard to change. Remember, we've just had a crisis. I'm fighting to get my window of tolerance widened. And so it is easy to slip back into old unhealthy patterns. Just recognize when you do. Have a lot of self-compassion, but you've got to learn to be really honest of when, okay, yeah, that's what I'm doing. So recognize it. Make your list of safety-seeking behaviors to avoid. And then again, work with, a trained therapist who understands betrayal trauma so that you have some accountability and support in doing that. Recognize that even life's stressors can throw you back into your old patterns. So that's where I talked about earlier, you're going to want to scale back. You're going to want to kind of manage a little better how much extra you have going on in your life. So you might have to learn to say no. You might have to simplify things. And for some of my clients, I have to reframe it and remind them, this is just short term for now, right? As you heal, your capacity will enlarge and you'll be able to do more. So it's really important. Now, another way it shows up in recovery with a betrayed partner and a betraying partner is this. You go to your betraying partner, the addict partner, because you're sensing something's off and you're asking them if they're okay. You're checking in because you want to be there for them, right? You're sensing something's not normal. And I really do believe in a betraying partner's intuition. And your partner, your addict partner, responds very defensively. And rather than being able to stand there and just let them be defensive and get curious and ask them, why they responded the way they did, I can stay grounded. What we do is we go into an old pattern, which would be I retreat and I stop talking and I shut down because that's my old way of doing it. Because in the past, I've always gone to you. In the past, I've asked you about these things. You haven't been truthful. Excuse me. You haven't been truthful with me. So I have to go over there to be safe. So recognize that. I talked earlier about we can be stuck in being impatient with our own recovery process and progress. I said it takes 3 to 5 years. And I think that sometimes if we can understand that it takes time and consistent effort, then we can have more patience and self-compassion, not only with ourselves, but also with the recovering addict. Remember, it takes that long to rewire the brain. We have to have healthy habits in place long enough, consistently over time, in order for the brain to replace the old unhealthy patterns and behaviors with new ones. So oftentimes when we start doing it, we'll get stuck because we maybe get triggered back into our betrayal and we're not using actively and intentionally our coping skills and tools to get regrounded. We're kind of staying in it. So we lose focus. We don't have the ability as other problems come along. And so we turn to our old habits. So we've got to be very intentional. I oftentimes tell my clients, recovery is a process. It's not an event. Recovery is a journey. It's not a destination. So how can we embrace staying in the here and now in the moment? How can we have the skills and tools that no matter what comes, you have the capacity and the ability to manage and deal with anything, which sounds really hard. I get that. But eventually that is one of, the goals that I hear a lot of women coming back later and saying, I'm so glad here's where I'm at. It feels so empowering. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is being stuck in ambivalence. Sometimes we have conflicting feelings. We have positive, we have negatives, and they battle each other. And so when we have conflicting feelings, oftentimes about staying in the relationship with our partners, it can become very confusing and alarming. For example, I love my partner, but I hate him so much because of what he's done to me and the pain he's caused. And I might go back and forth between that. I might be living in a circumstance where I'm telling myself I really need to move out, but I just can't imagine life without this person in it. I can't imagine moving forward, right? Because I have a concern for me and my future, and I even have a concern for their future as well. This can really wear you out, this constant kind of, I'm sitting in this state and I don't know what to do, that ambivalence. Sometimes I love you, sometimes I don't. And we have to remember that when we're here, that sometimes we just need to embrace the fact, okay, there's a lot of ambivalence. I call it with my clients, I have to sit in the unknown. I have to kind of sit in the gray. Nothing's black and white. It's very uncomfortable. But for here and now, is it okay in just this moment to stay in this relationship because your children need you to be here, right? You're both working recovery. You're both making progress, and we'll go through the progress financially. It's advantageous, right? That maybe there's enough good to stay, and that later on we can reevaluate whenever we need to along the way. I know that sometimes it gets very confusing when a partner decides to stay and they're not seeing anything changing. That's very different. And so you've got to take that into consideration as well. And I'm going to tell you, you can't get out of ambivalence on your own. It's going to be something you're going to want to go in. If you can recognize it in yourself and process it and work on that with your therapist, even in finding the group support you need, that would be so helpful in helping you to kind of understand. Sometimes we need help from other people. We need feedback from other people. We need to ask other people how they view things, because sometimes we're looking at it through such tunnel vision, right? Because that's what our brain does when our window of tolerance is very narrow and we don't have the capacity. So let's talk about getting unstuck. Number one, we just have to accept that there's a problem. We have to accept the truth about our situation, our circumstances, and even our own behaviors. So if you can find a trusted friend, I'm talking trusted, ask them to give you some compassionate truth bombs. What are you seeing? What are you noticing? Now you're going to go to them when you're really grounded. You want to go to them. I would even take a notebook. I would write down what you're hearing them say. I would try to stay out of judgment of yourself and judgment of the other person. I call that the compassionate observer stance. I'm going to look at this with compassion. I'm not going to judge me or them. Just write it down and reflect on it. I love Vicki Tibble-Palmer's owning your own reality. I use that with my clients all the time. We look at the data. We look at the facts. We look at the stories it takes us into. We look at the feelings and emotions, right? And we look and see, okay, what's going on here? And that's another really great way to understand what's going on internally for the person. Because sometimes when we're in trauma, and we do this because maybe we've learned how to cope with our trauma, manage our trauma, survive our trauma by disconnecting from what we're really feeling. and even recognizing what stories this, what we're thinking. And sometimes we minimize the data, what we're seeing and hearing. We minimize the facts. So that's another great way. The next one is seek knowledge. I think that this is so important. There is some really, really valuable information on sex and healing relationship. There's wonderful groups. Go to seekingintegrity.com. There's great groups there. Search for a CSAT therapist. Find programs that focus on prodependence. I find that it is so healing for the betraying partners, that particular approach. I came into therapy, and we were really not talking codependence, but all of a sudden prodependence came along and there was a huge shift in our women and in their recovery with that angle. So seek as much information on betrayal trauma from trusted sources that you can. Stop trying to resolve your issues using your unhealthy coping skills and tools, right? Notice if you're doing the same behavior over and over and over again, make note of that and seek for knowledge on how to get out of that behavior. Oftentimes it takes seeking out and finding qualified help. I, of course, because I'm a CSAT, I do believe that they have a lot of knowledge, and it's a very skilled, there's a different skill set when you're working with betrayal trauma and addiction recovery trauma, especially sexual and porn addiction. And so oftentimes I've had clients come in having gone to other therapists who don't understand it. And sometimes they come in, feeling with a lot of shame, right? Or a lot of confusion about what's going on. And then everybody's path is different. Discover your path. Identify what works best for you. Be okay to pick and choose. If something doesn't work, then find something else. Okay? Then prepare to take action. And you can do that. I love journaling. I think journaling is so important. That's how we can process. So if you're not in session with a therapist and you need to process, go to your journal and start asking yourself some questions. And I'm going to give you some questions. Again, I'm going to credit Dr. Skinner for some of these questions. But you've got to sit down and write out, what are the circumstances of my sexual betrayal, right? Is my partner a true sex addict? Do they have a porn addiction? Look at just the facts and then ask yourself, am I only focusing on the betrayal aspects, right? All the pain and the hurt where I'm concerned. Can I pull out the lens a little more and look at the bigger picture? Because sometimes that's very helpful in kind of understanding, okay, gosh, I need to step out of all of these trauma responses I'm having because they're really getting in the way. So maybe I need to focus on that and go back to the basics and get in to see my therapist more regularly. Another one is, how have I been reacting to my partner or responding to my partner? Reacting is I'm limbic, I'm outside my window of tolerance. Responding is I'm grounded, I'm able to think, I've got rationale, I've got reason, I've got logic. Okay, so check in on that. Then ask yourself, why do I react or respond to my partner like I do? What's the why? There might be a reason. Maybe it's I need to be heard, I need to be understood, I need empathy, and I'm fighting for it. Okay, if I had one behavior that I could change, what would be the one behavior that would help me heal? So find one. Start with one. That's what I tell my clients all the time. If it's just all I can do in the here and now is go outside and sit on the ground in the sun and just sit there for a few moments to calm my body down and to be mindful, then I say start with that. Okay. Then ask yourself, what do I need to do to prepare to make the change? Think about the preparation. Okay. Are there specific steps? Can I write down step 1, 2, 3? Can I just start with that? Or maybe it's just step 1. I'm going to do that. I'll check in and say, what's the next step? Then next, you're going to take action. So with that, start with your list and start with number 1. I'm going to call my therapist, make an appointment, right? Number 2 might be, I'm going to list the things that I notice as I journaled is showing up for me. I'm going to take that into my therapist's office. And then number 3, I'm going to show up at my therapist's office and be vulnerable. So that might be your action steps. Create a support system for help. You have to. You're not going to be able to take action without support. Remember, your capacity is narrow. Window tolerance is not what it used to be. We need other people. We need groups. We need qualified therapists. We need friends who have compassion and understanding and will assist us in a healthy way on our journey. And I would recommend that if you recognize some of the areas you're stuck, that you seek out help when you go to group and say, hey, I'm stuck on this. How have you guys gotten out of it? How do I get out of it? I'm here for some support and some ideas. Go into your therapist and ask the same things. Have that self-awareness. Okay. So the more often we take action and we start doing things, all of a sudden we're going to find, hey, your beliefs and how you're viewing things are going to change. And therefore, the outcome is going to change. So I suggest that throughout taking action, you journal what's going on. Because what is so healing is to go back and see how far you've come. And it reinforces the action that you took. So remember, like we said, healing is a journey. It's not a destination, right? It's a process. It's not an event. And so I tell my clients oftentimes, fake it till you make it. Sometimes that's what you need to do. I remember I would leave my house when I was going through betrayal trauma, and I would put a smile on my face when I go out in public. And I could have just been, crying on the inside, but on the outside, I smiled. And when people smiled back at me, all of a sudden, I felt more grounded. Pretty soon people were approaching me, right? About just general things in life, connecting with people now. And before long, I could go out in public and put a smile on my face. So try out new options, keep adjusting. If it doesn't work, try something new. Learn from the mistakes, readjust, and try something new. So hopefully that's helpful. I wanted to give you some really good information about getting unstuck.
It's really good.
I know it took a little long today.
No, but
I didn't want to, yeah.
No, it's all good. I've got notes. I so appreciate you saying everyone's path is different. And you kind of started out at the beginning of someone that got stuck in disclosure, and they told me after disclosure that we would. And I think that, I know two things. First of all, one, that people are looking for, I want hope and I want the pain to stop. And so I'm looking for the one thing. Mm-hmm. And so then it can feel like I'm stuck if that didn't magically fix everything. But I so appreciate it is different for everyone, and your timeline is different. And, the dance that you're doing, those cycles and patterns, it's your pattern. So, so if it's not working for you, I really appreciate what's one thing. Do one thing. And I think that would be empowering and doable. It's like one of those, I can do one thing, I just have to do one thing. Okay, I can do that one thing, and that would start the shift. I know, I was like, there's a couple times you were talking about, like the brain in the narrow window. I always call it my bandwidth too. My bandwidth is low because I have too much going on and everything. So I have to, to slow things down. I was talking to somebody this week, and they were talking about being dysregulated, and I made a mistake in booking a flight, and I'm like, and I was like, and give yourself some grace, and back, and they're working on, I'm trying to read, I'm trying to watch videos. I was like, maybe you watch 10 minutes of the video instead of the whole hour. Break it down into would 10 minutes be helpful versus now I've, it's not just shopping things and checking it off, and I'm doing all these things. It's what is useful for you, and if it's burning you out, that's not useful. So but I was thinking there was one time doing getting grounded, getting input. I had a situation, and it really was a crisis, and I went to a meeting. That's where people are helpful to me, and lots of people are helpful in this moment. There was a meeting, I went, and one of my friends, she sat me, she could tell I walked in, and I'm sure I was and she before the meeting started, within, I bet 2-3 minutes, she was like, are you okay in this moment? Do you have your health? Do you have, she starts going through the list of, do you have a car? Do you have a house? I mean, it's all of, and I was like, yes, at all of the things. And I could feel myself settling in, and it just gave me that, ability to go in this moment, which is what you were talking about. In this moment, my reality is I'm okay. Is there a crisis? Will I have to pick it apart? Yes. But is there support to do so? Yes. But in this moment, right now, I got grounded again. And then my brain came back online, because I don't even remember driving to the meeting. I mean, it was like, completely, offline. Thank goodness I didn't have an accident. But just getting that support, to get grounded. I think the journaling, and, I was thinking, because you said you can see how you've made progress. But I also thought you could see I've made progress in this area, but I'm still stuck in this area. So I think it would give you a better gauge of things. I do, before we answer questions, I do want to say, because you mentioned 3 to 5 years, and I want people to have hope. I want you to know that, yes, rewiring, having things be different, having it be more natural. Although, I mean, I think it's still tempting to go back to those old patterns if things are really, chaotic and crisis, even if it's year 6. But you will notice, like, it won't take 3 years before you go, okay, things are a little better. You're going to start seeing it, it's a journey, and you're going to go, okay, this area is a little better. That one still needs some work. That area is a little better. So I want you to know that there is hope. It isn't at year 3 or year 5, the switch magically flips and then now it's all better. It's a process, and you'll see, and there's ebbs and flows to it. So giving yourself some grace, understanding that an addict is, has brokenness, and it isn't you. It feels like it's you, but it's the long haul for it's the long haul, but it's the journey. And and you aren't alone. And there'll be moments where you go, gosh, I've come so far, and like I've got this peace in me right now that I couldn't have had I not done the journey. So hang in there is my point.
Yeah, and I love what you said, that I know oftentimes with my clients, when I tell them 3 to 5 years, or group members, they just like, oh no. And I said, no,
I know.
you're not going to be in that moment where you were in the depth of all of your trauma. No, it gets better and better and better. And all of a sudden you can go, oh, today was a really good day. I didn't have a single trigger. I could stay in my body. I was fully present, right? And then you have more and more and more of those. And so there is that gradual shift. Yes, we're going to have setbacks at times. That's life. That happens in everyday life. But you have the skills and tools to get back on track, get back online again. So I love that. Thank you.
So the first question is, I disclosed not therapeutic to my wife my behaviors back in November of 2020, and I have been sober since December of 2020, and my addiction revolved around porn and the lies surrounding that. She and I have gone back and forth on divorce, papers filed, removed from the court system. I have lived in and out of the house. I have not acted out during this time. She has brought to my attention that she is in an abuse cycle with me. She would take me back and ask me to leave, then take me back because she feels lonely, and then it makes the kids feel better. She now feels she is betraying herself. Do you have any insights into the abuse cycle that she feels she is in with me?
Yeah, and I think he went on and added that next question as well, which might help us a little bit.
Okay. It seems like it's the same question. She now feels, I think this is the same.
Just repeated. Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. Yes. Thanks for
Kinda came on
clarifying
twice.
that. Yeah.
I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. I'm going to focus first of all just on the participant who is going through this. A lot of times what we have to do when we are in, and I'll talk about that abuse cycle concept in a moment, because I'm going to look at it from an attachment perspective.
Thank you. I much prefer that too. Yeah.
I really do, because then that way we can understand, what's going on there. But for you, I would really encourage you to focus on your own recovery. I want to know what you're going through is hard. Again, it's that push pull, that I'm in, I'm out. That's got to be so painful for both of you. I imagine really hard for you, because here you've gone since the end of 2020 until now. But check and make sure that you are in, doing the recovery work you need to be doing. Take full accountability. Be really honest with yourself, kind of go back through those action steps I talked about, get in and with a therapist who I'm hoping you are working with you through this, this type of recovery. The more your partner can see you consistently doing your recovery, the safer you will become over time. But it takes consistent recovery over time before a partner feels safe enough. Because what happens oftentimes is a partner, a betrayed partner, can be triggered very easily. It doesn't take much. And I don't know what kind of recovery work she's doing. That is a vulnerable request you can make. You can't control her, you can't force her. But if she were to have support, someone she could turn to when she is having all of her betrayal stuff come up, or if she moves into a crisis situation, then she's got somebody who can help her understand what's going on, be there to support her, offer her, the help with the skills and the tools. But for you, that's going to be your focus. Ideally, in an ideal world, in a situation like yours, what I would do is I would try to get the couple into their own individual therapists and then have them meet together with one of those therapists and do maybe even a formal therapeutic, we call them a healing separation here, where you outline that you're going to spend some time apart. And while you're apart, here's the recovery work you're going to be focusing on for yourself. Here's the time we're going to spend together in healthy ways. Here's how we're going to spend time with the family. Here's how we're going to make it easy on the children while we do this. Here's how we're going to handle the finances. Here's all of our goals as a couple that we're working on while we're doing this, rather than it being you guys are in and out, because that, I think, is where it might feel like that abuse cycle. Through the lenses of compassion, you're both doing the best you know how to do based on what you know now. But as we talk about through the prodependence lens, is that, sometimes in our safety seeking, right, we're really just trying to make sure you're safe and secure. And I want to be able to connect to you. And I love the attachment perspective. And it is when I feel like I'm not close to you, I'm not attached, it's not safe. Sometimes we actually fight for connection. That's our safety seeking. I'm fighting to get you to understand my pain. I'm fighting to get you to understand what my needs are. I'm fighting, because I'm seeing, that you're not safe and I want you to be safe, whatever it is. And so, yes, we get into the arguing. We might get into the, shutting down and not talking to each other. And it hurts deeply. And if we're focused outward, we're going, yeah, that feels very abusive. Now, like I said earlier today, and that is, anytime there's domestic violence, that's abuse, right? I also I think language can be abusive too. So there's got to be boundaries set around that. And, for you as the partner, if it's coming in your direction, that's when you, in a very loving way, you take the pause or the time out, telling your partner, hey, I'm willing to discuss this with you. I care about you. I want us to figure this out. But for right now, I'm going to step out. I'm going to get grounded. And I will come back to you later tonight. And let's see if we can talk about it then. If that doesn't work, then we'll talk about it in the morning. But I think, not knowing a whole lot about your background, the sooner you can help your partner maybe understand the importance of getting her own help. So she's not doing it alone if she is. Both of you looking at maybe your recovery through the prodependence lenses, and finding the qualified support that you need so you're not doing this alone, and understanding that what you're in, I think sometimes that abuse cycle is also a fear cycle. It can be a shame cycle. I mean, we have a lot of that. And that could be a really great future content of all the cycles we might go into, and what it's really about, because I think it's all about the same thing.
I appreciate that you just talked about the structure and moving back in because someone's lonely or it's better for the kids, but then pushing like the chaos that creates and the distrust that creates, is problematic. When there's a formal therapeutic separation, and it could be within the house. We have people that set those up within the home, but there's a plan. It's like, here's how we're going to do this. here's what we're looking for to be able to navigate to go to the next stage. We're going to have a time frame, 3 months. So I'm making it up, but that we're going to look at it and see where we're at with this. So it isn't indefinite or, at the whim of something. But Gavin Sharp did, and I think it was December 1st of last year, a very good, webinar on healthy boundaries for addicts. And I think it's super helpful. I mean, he said everyone needs healthy boundaries. And he talked about that. So on sexandrelationshiphealing.com, the previously recorded webinars are under the resource tab. And there's a little guide, but you can always email me, Tammy at TAMI at seekingintegrity.com. I'll point you to it. I actually saved that one because I was sharing that one so often, but you having healthy boundaries for you. But this feels like we did disclosure on our own. We're trying to navigate all of this on our own. And I love that you're here, but this won't be enough. Getting the help that you guys need to stabilize and then move forward, and you got kiddos involved, so like the ability to provide a calmer environment for the kiddos. I encourage both of you, even though you're hurt, to show up as the adults and work on navigating that, in a different way. So.
And I love Dr. Rob's book, Out of the Doghouse. That's another great resource.
And we have a work group, Out of the Doghouse, for men who have been caught cheating, 6-week course. We've got a new betrayed partner group starting June 8th again too. So the work groups are all on seeking integrity. We have inner child, when you're talking about attachment wounds, we've got an attachment wound one. So we've got sex addiction 101, porn addiction 101. But the betrayed partner group is a prodependent lens, and that is starting again June 8th. So sign up. So the next question, Debbie, is I feel stuck and am ambivalent about my relationship. I keep going back and forth with what I want to do, stay or leave. The issue that is keeping me stuck is that although he says he is working on recovery, he is not, and I believe he is still acting out. When he leaves the house, I immediately go into anxious, fear-filled state. How can I get past this if nothing has changed? I think it's interesting that when he leaves the house, so I assume that's the fear of the acting out. Okay. Yeah. So what are your thoughts?
On that one, and that's going to be a hard one. I kind of go back into boundaries as a thing here and really understanding, you're going to probably have to go a little bit deeper. I'm not sure what discussions you've had around him and him being in recovery and what your needs are. That's got to be so hard, and not knowing what to do because you don't feel safe, right? There's that sense of security and safety that's missing because he says he's in recovery, but you're not actually seeing that. I'm assuming proof of that. Whether it's you're actually seeing him going to meetings or working on workbooks, or you're seeing shifts and changes in his behaviors. I know, betrayed partners are very in tune to that. So for you, it's okay, how do I manage that anxiety, that anxiousness, that fear, when he leaves the house? And how long can I manage that and deal with that? Again, with a lot of my partners, what I will do is I will have them list all the pros for staying and, and the cons, for leaving. And we start looking at that list and going through them to see, okay, now if the choice is I'm going to stay, then it means you're going to work on you. And that means that you've got to step out of whether he gets better or not. Here's what I'm going to do for me, and here's what I need. And I tell my clients, in some cases, if I'm wanting emotional connection with him and talking about deep emotional things, he might not ever have the capacity if he's not in recovery. He might not ever get to a place of empathy. But do I have other people, friends, girlfriends I can turn to, my support group I can turn to meet that need? So that might be one way for you to get unstuck, is to find 1 or 2 people that can be there to kind of help you, in those areas to support you. Again, if you're not going to a group or, seeing a therapist where you can process some of this stuff and talk it through with people, I think that's very, very helpful. That would be another way. And if he chooses not to change, that's another thing I sit and I process with my clients. Okay, so if he doesn't change, right, what are you going to do? You know, and I really tune back into their intuition. And sometimes they'll say, well, you know, I guess I'm just going to learn to just be okay with it. And I'm going to have to almost just put that behind me and figure out how to create happiness and wholeness by adding all these other aspects of my life into it. It's not what I want, but we've got children. I'm going to do this while the children are here. And then once the children are gone, I'm going to reevaluate.
Mhm.
And sometimes I see that when a betrayed partner steps out of asking the partner how they're doing in their recovery, if they're doing it, and instead they set a boundary of, I need this, I need this, I need this for safety and security. And, you know, it's up to you. You can choose to provide that for me. If not, then I'm going to have to kind of stay a little disconnected from the relationship because I feel safe over here. I can't approach you. I really want to approach you. Or if it's really bad, you know, some of my clients have said, you know, then I'm going to have to, if this happens, I find out this, you know, then the relationship is over. That's hard. You cannot ever say the relationship is over unless you have, you know, a really good sense that you're going to follow through. You have to. That is a
You have
boundary.
to.
So my clients,
Yeah.
do not throw that out there. You know, that is something that should be very intentional. You work through it. You've got to do a lot of, you know, self-analysis on that as far as pros and cons, like I talked about. There's a lot to work through on that. It's unfortunate that you're stuck. I'd say one way to get unstuck in that is get support. As many people in, you know, there for you as possible, people you can talk to.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. I hope you're joining the betrayed partner drop-in groups. And like he's saying, he's in recovery. I'm with you. You know, I'm with you. Don't trust it. I want to flip it to assume he's going to act out. And like every time he leaves the house, assume he's going to act out. Regardless of what he does, what do you need to do to take care of you? And that's the boundaries that, you know, that Debbie was talking about. What do you need to do to take care of you, regardless of what he does or doesn't do? This is about your safety. What do you need to do to take care of you? So we're out of time. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, everyone. Join us again in a few weeks. So in 2 weeks. All right. We'll see you then.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.